Hello everyone, this is Akshara from GoAskNow. Let's get into Chapter 7. How do organisms reproduce? We have discussed before the mechanism by which organisms reproduce. Let us ask a more basic question. Why do organisms reproduce? After all, reproduction is not necessary to maintain the life of an individual organism. Unlike the essential life process such as nutrition, respiration, or excretion. On the other hand, if an individual organism is going to create more individuals, a lot of its energy will be spent in the process. So, why should an individual organism waste its own energy in this process? It does not need to stay alive. It would be interesting to discuss the possible answers in our minds. Whatever the answer to this question, it is obvious that we notice organisms because they reproduce. If the process of reproduction is stopped, the particular organism would have not been existed now. So if there were to be only one non-reproducing member of the particular kind, it is doubtful that we could have noticed its existence. It is the large number of organisms belonging to a single species that bring them to our notice. That's how we see different organisms now. Even our humankind is reproducing, and we could see different people, races, colors. It's because of this process. How do we know that two different individual organisms belong to the same species? Usually we say this because they look similar to each other. Thus, reproducing organisms create new individuals that look very much like themselves. For deeper understanding, do organisms create exact copies of themselves? There lies a question. Organisms look similar because their body design are similar. If body design are to be similar, the blueprint of these design should be similar. Thus, reproducing at its most basic level will involve making copies of the blueprint of body design. So in previous class, we learned that the chromosomes in the nuclei of cell contain information for inheritance of features from parents to next generation in the form of DNA molecule. The DNA in cell nucleus is information source of making protein. If the information is changed, different protein will be made. Different proteins will eventually lead to altered body design. Therefore, a basic event in reproduction is creation of a DNA copy. Cells use chemical reaction to build copies of their DNA. This creation two copies of DNA in reproducing cell, and they will need to be separated from each other. So, however, knowing one copy of DNA in the original cell and simply pushing the other one out would not work here. Because the copy pushed out would not have any organized cellular structure for maintaining life process. So therefore, DNA copy is accomplished by creation of an individual cellular apparatus and thus the DNA copies separate, each with its own cellular apparatus. So effectively, a cell divides to give rise to two cells. The two cells are of course similar, but are they likely to be absolutely identical? The answer to this question will depend on accurately the copying reaction involved occur. So no biochemical reaction is absolutely reliable. Therefore, it is only to be expected that the process of copying the DNA will have some variation each time. So as the result, the DNA copies generated will be similar but may not be identical to the original. So in this process, the created new individuals will be similar but not necessarily identical to the own creation. Some of these variations might be so drastic that the new DNA copy cannot work with cellular apparatus it inherits. Such a newborn cell will simply die. On the other hand, there could still be many other variations in DNA copies that could not lead to such a drastic outcome. Thus, the surviving cells are similar to but subtly different from each other. This inbuilt tendency for variation during reproduction is the basis of evolution, and we will discuss is in the next chapter. So what is the importance of variation? Why? Population of organisms fill well-defined places or niches in the ecosystem using their ability to reproduce. The consistency of DNA copying during reproduction is important for maintaining of body structure, design, features that allow the organism to use the particular niche. Reproduction is therefore linked to the stability of population of species. So, however, niche can change because of reasons beyond the control of the organisms. External factors like temperatures on Earth can go up or down, water levels can vary, or there could be meteorite hits. To think of new example, if a population of reproducing organisms were suited to a particular niche and if the niche were drastically altered, the population would be wiped out. So, however, if some variations were to be present in a few individuals in these populations, there would be some change for them to survive. Thus, if there were population of bacteria living in temperature water, and if the water temperature were to be increased by global warming, most of these bacteria would die because the bacteria could not withhold the heat. But the few variants resistant to heat and would survive and grow further. And the generation created from the bacteria which are resistant power can hold the heat and be more better and survive for more time. Variation is thus useful for survival of species over time. Now, this gives rise to questions like what is the importance of DNA copying in reproduction? Why is variation benefit to species but not necessary for the individual? So modes of reproduction used by single organism. We will have two activities now. So dissolve 10 grams of sugar in 100 ml of water. Take 20 ml of this solution in a test tube and a pinch of yeast granules to it. Put a cotton plug on the mouth of the test tube and keep it in warm place. After 1 or 2 hours, put a small drop of yeast culture from the test tube on a slide and cover it with cover slip. Observe the slide under microscope. What you will see? The second one is wet a slice of bread and keep it in cool, moist and dry place. Observe the surface of the slice with the magnifying glass. Record your observation. You could see that there is some change has been made from the original product. There is something growing on that. And you will observe some change in the color, texture of the final product. Compare and contrast the way in which yeast grow in the first case and how wood grows in the second. So the mold grows in the second case and the yeast grows in the first case. How does it happen? The context in which reproductive process work. So let us now examine how different organisms actually reproduce. The mode by which various organisms reproduce depend on body design of the organism. First, let's see the fission. For unicellular organism, cell division or fission leads to creation of new individuals. Many different patterns of fission have been observed. Many bacteria and protozoa simply split into two equal halves during cell division. In organisms such as amoeba, the splitting of the two cells during division can take place in any plane. Here comes the activity 3. Observe a permanent slide of amoeba under a microscope. Similarly, observe another permanent slide of amoeba showing binary fission. Now, compare the observation of both slides. So, you could see in figure 7.1a binary fission of amoeba. So, the process takes place from the parent amoeba splits into two daughter amoeba. However, some unicellular organisms show somewhat more organization of their bodies, such as seen in Leishmania, which have a pipe-like structure at one end of the cell. In such organism, binary fission occur in a finite orientation in related to these structures. Other single-celled organisms such as malarial parasite Plasmodium divide into many daughter cells simultaneously by multiple fission. Yeast, on the other hand, can put out small buds that separate and grow further, as you have seen from the activity 7.1. So here comes another activity. Collect water from lake or pond that appears dark green, contain filamentous structure. Put out a two filament on slide. Put a drop of glycerin on these filament and cover it with cover slip. Observe the slide under microscope. Different tissues in Spirogyra filaments is identified in it. In multiple cellular organisms with relatively simple body organization, simple reproductive method can still work. Spirogyra, for example, simply break up into smaller pieces upon maturation. These pieces or fragments grow into new individuals. We work out the reason for this based on what we see in activity 7.4. This is not true for all multicellular organisms. They cannot simply divide cell by cell. The reason is that many multicellular organisms, as we have seen, are not simply random collection of cells. Specialized cells are organized as tissues, and tissue are organized in organs, which then have to be placed at definite position in the body. In such a carefully organized situation, cell by cell division would be impractical. Multicellular organisms, therefore, need to use more complex way of reproduction. A basic strategy used in multicellular organism is that different cell types perform different specialized function. Following this generally pattern, reproduction in such organism is also function of specific cell type. How is reproduction to be achieved from single cell type if the organism itself consists of many cell types? The answer is that there must be single cell type in the organism that is capable of growing, proliferating, and making other cell types under the right circumstances. So, what is regeneration? Many fully differentiated organisms have the ability to give rise to new individuals, organisms from their body parts. That is, if the individual is somewhat cut or broken up into many pieces, many of these pieces grow into separate individuals. For example, some animals like Hydra and Planaria can be cut into any number of pieces and each piece grow into a complete organism. This is known as regeneration. Regeneration is carried out by specified cells. These cells proliferate and make large number of cells. From this mass of cells, different cells undergo change to become various cell types and tissues. These changes take place in an organized sequence referred to as development. So you could see here regeneration of planaria. The one single organism is cut into various parts and these can generate the missing part and finally be created as a new organism. However, it is not same as reproduction since most organisms would not normally depend on their cut and up to be able to reproduce. Another method is budding. Organisms such as Hydra use regenerative cell for reproduction in the process of budding. In Hydra, a bud develops as an outgrowth due to repeated cell division at one specific site. As you can see, at one specific site, the bud is created and it's regenerated and grows into an tiny individual, then develop into a fully matured organism and detach from the parent body and become a new independent individual. So, what is vegetative propagation? There are many plants in which parts like root, stem, leaves develop into new plant under appropriate condition. Unlike in most animals, plants can indeed use such mode of reproduction. This property of vegetative propagation is used in methods such as layering, crafting to grow many plants like sugarcane, roses, or grapes for flowers, like in agricultural processes. Plants raised by vegetative propagation can bear flowers and fruits either than those products from seed. Such method also make possible the propagation of plants such as banana, orange, rose, and jasmine that have lost the capacity to produce seeds. Another advantage of vegetative propagation is that all plants produced are genetically similar enough to the parent plant to have all the characteristics. Here we have two activities in growing a potato and a money plant. You can check it out. Similarly, bud producing in notches along the leaves margin of bryophyllum fall onto soil and develop into new plants. This is another way of reproduction, the tissue culture. New plants are grown by removing tissue or separating cells from the growing tip of the plant and generating it into a new plant by artificial medium. Another thing of reproduction is spore formation. Even in many simple multicellular organisms, specific reproduction paths can be identified. The thread-like structure that develop on the bread above are the hypha of bread mold. They are not reproductive part. On the other hand, the tiny bulb on the stick structure are involved in reproduction. The blob are sporangia, which contain cell or spores that can eventually develop into a new individual. These spores are converted by thick walls that protect them until they come into contact with another moist surface and can begin to grow. This is done in rhizophus, and this is one another reproduction method. All of these modes of reproduction that we have discussed so far, creating new generations, is in single individual. This is known as asexual reproduction, which can give rise to many questions here. Let's get into sexual reproduction. We also familiar with mode of reproduction that depend on involvement of two individuals before a new generation can be created. Bulls alone cannot produce new calves, nor can hens alone produce new chicks. In such cases, both sexes, male and female, are needed to produce new generation, which is the significance of this sexual mode of reproduction. Are there any limitations of the asexual mode of reproduction? We can discuss this. Why sexual mode of reproduction? The creation of two new cells from one involves copying of DNA as well as of cellular apparatus. The DNA copying mechanism, as we have noted, cannot be absolutely accurate, and the resultant error are a source of variation in population of organisms. Each individual organism cannot be protected by variations, but in the population, variations are useful for ensuring the survival of species. It would therefore make sense if organisms came up with reproductive modes that allow more and more variation to be generated. While DNA copying mechanisms are not absolutely accurate, they are precise enough to make the generation of variation a fairly slow process. If the DNA copying mechanism were to be low accurate, many of the resultant DNA copies would not be able to work with the cellular apparatus and would eventually die. So, how the process of making variants be speeded up? Each new variation is made in a DNA copy that already has variation accumulated from previous generation. Thus, two different individuals in a population would have quite different patterns of accumulated variation. Since all of these variations are in living individuals, it is assured that they do not have any really bad effects. Combining variations from two or more individuals would thus create new combinations of variants. Each combination would be novel since it would involve two different individuals. The sexual mode of reproduction incorporates such a process of combining DNA from two different individuals during reproduction. But this creates major difficulty. In each new generation, it is to the combination of DNA copies from two pre-existing individuals, then each new generation will end up having twice the amount of DNA that the previous generation had. This is likely to mess up the control of the cellular apparatus of the DNA. How many ways can we think for solving this difficulty? We have seen earlier that organisms become more complex, the specialization of tissue increases. One solution that many multicellular organisms are found for problem mentioned above is to have special lineages of cells in specialized organ in which only half the number of chromosomes and half amount of DNA as compared to the non-reproductive body cells. This is achieved by the process of cell division called meiosis. Thus, when these germ cells from two individuals combine during sexual reproduction to form new individuals, it results in re-establishing of number of chromosomes and DNA content in new generation. If the zygote is to grow and develop into an organism which has highly specialized tissue and organs, then it has to have sufficient store of energy for doing this. In very simple organism, it is seen that two germ cells are not very different from one another, or many even be similar. But as body designs become more complex, the germ cell also specialize. One germ cell is large, contain the food store, while the other is smaller and likely to be motile. Conventionally, the motile germ cell is called the male gamete, and the germ cell containing the stored food is called female gamete. We shall see in next few sessions how the need to create two different types of gametes give rise to difference in male and female reproduction organ, and in some cases difference in bodies of male and female organisms. So, sexual reproduction in flowering plants. The reproductive part of angiosperms are located in the flower. You have already studied the different parts of flower: sepals, petals, stamens, and pistil. Stamens and pistil are reproductive part of a flower which contain germ cells. And possible function would the petal and sepals serve. The flower may be unisexual like papaya and watermelon when it contains either stamens or pistil, or bisexual in case of hibiscus when it contains both stamens and pistil. Stamen in the male reproductive part and it produces pollen grains that are yellowish in color. You must have seen this yellowish powder that often stick onto our hands if we touch the stamen of the flower. Pistil is present in the center of flower and the female reproductive part. It is made of three parts. The swollen bottom part is the ovary, the middle elongated part is the style, and the terminal part, which may be sticky, is the stigma. The ovary contains ovules, and each ovule has an egg cell. The male germ cell, produced by pollen grain, fuses with the female gamete present in the ovule. This fusion in the germ cells or fertilization gives us the zygote, which is capable of growing into a new plant. Thus, the pollen needs to be transferred from the stamen to the stigma. If this transfer of pollen occurs in same flower, it is referred to as self-pollination. On the other hand, if the pollen is transferred from one flower to another, it is known as cross-pollination. This transfer of pollen from one flower to another is achieved by agents like wind, water, or animals. After the pollens land on the suitable stigma, it has to reach the female germ cells, which are in the ovary. For this, a tube grown out of the pollen grain and travel through the style to reach the ovary. So after fertilization, the zygote divides several times to form an embryo within the ovule. The ovule develops a tough coat and is granule converted into a seed. The ovule grows rapidly and ripen to form a fruit. Meanwhile, petal, sepals, stamen, style, and stigma may shrivel and fall off. Have you ever observed any flower part still persisting in the fruit? Try and work out the advantages of seed formation for a plant. The seed contains the future plant or embryo, which develops into a seedling under appropriate condition. This process is known as germination. So here is activity. Soak a few seeds of Bengal gram and keep them overnight. Drain excess water and cover the seeds with a wet cloth and leave them for a day. Make sure that the seeds do not become dry. Maintain the moisture. Cut out open the seeds carefully and observe the different parts. Observe your observation we can see in 7.9 and see if you can identify any parts. Let's get into reproduction in human being. So far, we are discussing the variety of modes that different species use for reproducing. Let us now look at the species that we are most interested in. Humans. Humans use a sexual mode of reproduction. And how does this process work? Let us begin at a apparent unrelated topic. All of us know that our bodies change as we become older. You have learned changes that take place in your body earlier classes. Also, we notice that our height have increased continuously from early age till now. We acquire teeth, we even lose the old so-called milk teeth and acquire the new one. So all of these changes that can be grouped under the general process of growth in which the body becomes larger. In early stage of teenage years, the whole new set of changes occur and cannot be explained simply as body enlargement. Instead, the appearance of the body changes, proportions changes, new features appear, and so on. Some of these changes are common in both boys and girls. We begin to notice thick hair growing in new parts of the body like armpits and genital area between thighs, which can also become darker in color. Thin hair all over the legs and arms as well as on face. The skin frequently become oily and we might begin to notice pimples. We begin to be conscious and aware of both our own bodies and those of the other in new ways. On the other hand, there are also changes taking place that are difference between boys and girls. In the case of girls, breast begin to increase with darkening of skin of nipples at the tips of the breasts. Also, girls begin to menstruate at around this time. Boys begin to have new thick hair grown on the face and their voices begin to crack. Further, the penis occasionally begin to become enlarged and erect, either in daydream or at night. So what are all these? All of these changes takes place slowly over a period of month or year. They do not happen all of at the same time in one person, nor do they happen at an exact age. In some people, they happen early or quickly, while in others, they can happen slowly. Also, each change do not become complete quickly either. So, for example, thick hair on the face of boys appear as a few scattered hair first, and only slowly does the growth begin to become uniform. Even so, all these changes show differences between people. Just as we have differently shaped noses or ears, so also we have different patterns of hair growth or size, shape of breast or penis. All of these changes are aspects of sexual maturation of the body. Why does the body show sexual maturation at this age? We have talked about the needs for specialized cell types in multicellular bodies to carry out specialized functions. The creation of germ cells to participate in sexual reproduction is another specialization function. And we have seen that plants develop special cells, tissue types to create them. Beings also develop special tissues for this purpose. However, while the body of the individual organism is growing to its adult size, the resources of the body are mainly directed at achieving the growth. While that is happening, the maturation of reproductive tissue is not likely to be major priority. Thus, as the rate of general body growth begins to slow down, reproductive tissues begin to mature. This period during adolescence is called puberty. So, how do we all changes that we have talked about link to the reproductive process? We must remember that the sexual mode of reproduction means that germ cells from two individuals have to join together. This can happen by the external release of germ cells from the bodies of individuals, as happens in flowering plants. Or it can happen by two individuals joining their bodies together for internal transfer of germ cells for fusion, as happens in many animals. If participating in this process of mating, their state of sexual maturity must be identifiable by other individuals. Many changes during puberty, such as new hair growth patterns, are signals that sexual maturation is taking place. On the other hand, actual transfer of germ cells between two people needs special organs for sexual act, such as female penis when it is capable of becoming erect. In mammals such as human, the baby is carried by the mother's body for a long period in womb and will be breastfed later. The female reproductive organ and the breasts will need to be matured to accommodate these possibilities. Let us look at this system involved in the process of sexual reproduction. First, let's take male reproductive system. The figure is shown in 7.10. We could see that it consists of a portion which produces the germ cell and the other portion that deliver it. The portion of germ cell or the sperm take place in the testes. These are located outside the abdominal cavity in scrotum because the sperm formation requires a lower temperature than the normal body temperature. We have discussed the role of testes in the secretion of hormone testosterone in previous chapter. In addition to regulating the formation of sperm, testosterone brings about changes in appearance seen in boys at the time of puberty. The sperm formed are delivered through the vas deferens, which unites with a tube coming from urinary bladder. The urethra thus forms a common passage for both sperm and urine. Along the path of vas deferens, glands like prostate and seminal vesicles are their secretions so that the sperm are now in a fluid which makes their transport easier, and this fluid also provides nutrition. The sperm are tiny bodies that consist of mainly genetic material and long tail that helps them to move towards the female germ cell. So here is the female reproductive system. The female germ cell or the eggs are made in the ovaries. They are also responsible for production of some hormones. We could see in 7.11 and identify the various organs in female reproductive system. When a girl is born, the ovaries already contain thousands of immature eggs. On reaching puberty, some of these start maturing. One egg is produced every month by one of the ovaries. The egg is carried from the ovary to the womb through a thin oviduct or fallopian tube. The two oviducts unite into a elastic bag-like structure known as the uterus. The uterus opens into the vagina through the cervix. The sperm enter through the vaginal passage during sexual intercourse. They travel upwards and reach the oviduct where they may encounter the egg. The fertilized egg zygote starts dividing and form a ball of cells or embryo. Embryo is implanted in the lining of the uterus where they continue to grow and develop organs to become a fetus. We have seen in earlier sections that the mother's body is designed to undertake the development of the child. Hence, the uterus prepares itself every month to receive and nurture the growing embryo. The lining thickens and is richly supplied with blood to nourish the growing embryo. The embryo gets nutrition from mother's blood with the help of special tissues called the placenta. This is a disc which is embedded in the uterine wall. It contains villi on the embryo's side of the tissue. On mother's side are blood spaces which surround the villi. This produces large surface area for glucose and oxygen to pass from the mother to the embryo. The developing embryo will also generate waste substances which can be removed by transferring them into the mother's blood through the placenta. The development of child inside the mother's body takes approximately 9 months. The child is born as a result of rhythmic contraction of the muscles in the uterus. So, this is a very beautiful process of how a baby is born. This is in the case of fertilized egg. So, what happens when the egg is not fertilized? If the egg is not fertilized, it lives for about 1 month since the ovary releases one egg every month. The uterus also prepares itself every month to receive a fertilized egg. Thus, its lining becomes thick and spongy. This would be required for nourishing the embryo if fertilization had taken place. Now, however, this lining is not needed anymore, so the lining slowly breaks and comes out through the vagina as a blood and mucus, and this cycle takes place roughly every month, and this is known as the menstruation. It usually lasts for about 2 to 8 days in girls, and it continues every month. So, what is reproductive health? As we have seen, the process of sexual maturation is gradual and takes place while general body growth is still going on. Therefore, some degree of sexual maturation does not necessarily mean that the body or the mind is ready for sexual act or for having and bringing up children. How do we decide if the body or mind is ready for the major responsibility? All of us are under many different kind of pressure about these issues. There can be pressure from our friends for participating in many activities, whether we really want to or not. There can be pressure from government agencies to avoid having children. In this situation, making choices can become very difficult. We must also consider the possible health consequences of having sex. We have discussed in earlier classes that disease can be transmitted from person to person in a variety of ways. Since the sexual act is very intimate connection of bodies, it is not surprising that many diseases can be sexually transmitted. These include bacterial infections such as gonorrhea and syphilis, and viral infections such as warts or HIV/AIDS. It is possible to prevent the transmission of such disease during the sexual act. Using a covering called the condom for the penis during sex helps to prevent transmission of many of these infections to some extent. The sexual act always has the potential to lead to pregnancy. So, pregnancy will make major demands on the body and mind of the woman, and if she is not ready for it, her health will be adversely affected. Therefore, many ways have been devised to avoid pregnancy. These contraceptive methods fall in a number of categories. The one that creation of mechanical barriers so that the sperm do not reach there. The condom on the penis, similar covering worn in the vagina can be used to serve this purpose. Another category of contraceptive act by changing the hormonal imbalance of the body so that the egg is not released and fertilization cannot be occurred. But these drugs commonly need to be taken orally as pills. However, since they change the hormonal imbalance, they can be causing side effects too. Other contraceptive devices such as loop or the copper T are placed in the uterus to prevent pregnancy. Again, they can cause side effect due to irritation in the uterus. So if the vas difference in the male is blocked, sperm transfer will be prevented. If the fallopian tube in the female is blocked, the egg will not be able to reach the uterus. So in both cases, fertilization will not take place. Also, surgical methods can be used to create such blocks. While surgical methods are safe in long run, but also surgery itself can cause infection. On the other hand, if not performed properly, it creates infections, etc. So surgery can be used for removal of unwanted pregnancy. These may be misused by people who do not want a particular child, as happens in illegal sex selection of abortion of female fetuses. For a healthy society, the female-male sex ratio must be maintained. Because of reckless female feticides, child sex ratio is declining at an alarming rate in some sections of a society, although prenatal sex determination has been prohibited by law. We have noted earlier that reproduction is the process by which organisms increase their populations. The rate of birth and death in a given population will determine its size. The size of human population is a cause of concern for many people. This is because an expanding population make it harder to improve everybody's standard of living. However, if inequality in society is the main reason for poor standards of living for many people, the size of the population is relatively unimportant. If we look around us, we can identify as the most important reason for poor living standards. So here's what we have learned in this chapter. Reproduction, unlike other life processes, is not essential to maintain the life of an individual organism. It involves creation of DNA copy and addition cellular apparatus by cell involved in the process. Various organisms use different mode of reproduction depending on their body design. In fission, many bacteria and protozoa simply divide into two or more daughter cells. Organisms such as hydra can regenerate if they are broken into pieces. They can also give out bud which mature into a new individuals. Roots, stems and leaves of some plants develop into new plants through vegetative propagation. These are examples of asexual reproduction where new generations are created from a single individual. Sexual reproduction involves two individuals for creation of new individual. DNA copying mechanisms create variations which are useful for ensuring the survival of the species. Modes of sexual reproduction allow for greater variation to be generated. Reproduction in flowering plants involves transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma, which is referred to as pollination. This is followed by fertilization. Changes in body at puberty, such as increased in breast size in girls and new facial hair growth in boys, are signs of sexual maturation. The male reproductive system in human being consists of testes, which produce sperms, vas deferens, seminal vesicles, prostate glands, urethra, and penis. Female reproductive system in human being consists of ovaries, fallopian tube, uterus, and vagina. Sexual reproduction in human beings involves introduction of sperm in the vagina of the female. Fertilization occurs in fallopian tube. Contraceptives to avoid pregnancy can be achieved by use of condoms, oral pills, copper tea, and other methods. For further questions, you can contact online classes in GoAskNow. Thank you for listening. Let's see in the next chapter. Thank you.